Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I wasn't supposed to find out about the money. That's what keeps circling in my head, like a dog chasing its tail, over and over. I wasn't supposed to know. But then Emily got buzzed on her second mimosa during one of those try-hard family brunches at that overpriced place with the shitty sourdough and fake rustic charm. She leaned back in her chair, tilted her head like she was letting me in on some juicy gossip, and just said it, 6 figures. Just like that. "Didn't Dad tell you?" she asked, eyes wide, voice soft like she knew what she was doing but couldn't stop it even if she wanted to. No, he fucking didn't. There was this awful silence between us right then. She looked like she regretted it instantly, reaching for her water like maybe she could swallow the words back down. I just nodded and chewed my eggs like nothing happened, because when you grow up as the one who doesn't get told things, you learn real quick how to keep chewing through the betrayal. And on the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't take the highway. I just drove through back roads like I was trying to outpace the memory of what she'd said. They gave her money. A down payment. 100,000 fucking dollars, or maybe more. Just handed it over like a housewarming present, like the thing you do for the daughter you believe in. Not a loan, not a discussion. A gift. And me? I'd been renting since the divorce. Crappy 2-bedroom with thin walls and a neighbor who screams at her boyfriend every Thursday night like clockwork. I've got a stable job in IT, stable enough anyway, but not the kind that gets you into homeownership without a miracle or a favor. I've been putting money away, chipping at debt, skipping vacations, taking on freelance contracts I hate just to build something. And I've done it quietly because that's what they always liked about me. I didn't complain. I just dealt. Emily has a husband, a kid, a life that checks all the boxes. She's the settled one, they say. A kindergarten teacher with a Pinterest smile and a calendar full of birthday reminders. She never had a rough year where the wheels came off. Never had to pawn her guitar to make rent. Never had to start over at 38 with a couch from Craigslist and no one on her side. I remember when Mom got sick, I was the one who flew home, took unpaid leave to help her through chemo, slept on the goddamn recliner in the living room for 3 weeks straight, cooked whatever she could keep down. Emily called once a day, sent flowers once a week, and showed up twice. And when Dad cried in the garage because he didn't know how to handle a fragile wife, I was the one who found him, beer in hand, shaking like a leaf, and sat next to him until the shaking stopped. So tell me this, how the hell does all that stack up to $0? How do you look at 2 kids and decide only one gets a chance to breathe? The next morning, I called my mom, casual as hell. Asked how Emily's new place was. She went on and on about how beautiful the backyard is, how the kitchen has those quartz countertops she always wanted, how the neighborhood has a park and decent schools. I waited. Gave her space to say it. She didn't. So I asked straight out, "Did you and Dad help her with the house?" There was a pause. Not long, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. "Well, she needed a little boost," Mom said, using that voice she saves for when she thinks she's being reasonable. "You know, starting a family, things get expensive." "And I didn't?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, even though my heart was pounding. "That was different," she said. "You were going through a lot. You needed time to find your footing again." Right. Because I'd gotten divorced, I was unstable. Because I struggled, I wasn't trustworthy. Because I didn't marry the right person and pop out a kid by 35, I wasn't a safe bet. When I asked Dad, his response hit even harder. "She's settled down," he said. "You're still figuring life out." That sentence rattled in my skull like a coin in an empty jar. Still figuring life out. Like I was some adolescent still living in a dorm room, not a grown-ass man who's been through hell and clawed his way back. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just sat there on the other end of the line, nodding at no one, staring at the cracks in my ceiling and wondering if maybe that's all I was to them, a broken roof that wasn't worth repairing. Here's the thing that doesn't get said enough: when parents pick favorites, they don't always do it with malice. Sometimes they think they're being fair. They justify it with circumstance. But it still hurts the same. It still carves something out of you that doesn't grow back right. I thought about every time I swallowed disappointment around them, every time I showed up to birthdays with a smile and a gift card, every time I clapped for Emily's achievements like I was proud and not hollowed out. I thought about the time I helped pay off her student loans when she got laid off during the recession. $2,000, never repaid, never even thanked properly. But hey, that's what big brothers are for, right? And now I was supposed to smile through this too? Let them tell me I wasn't settled enough for support? I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and thought about what I wanted to say, what I needed them to hear. But nothing sounded right. Nothing felt like it would actually make a dent. Because deep down, I knew it wasn't about money. It was about being seen, being chosen. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't stop asking myself, why was she worth the help and I wasn't? The next weekend, I showed up at their house unannounced, which isn't something I usually do, but this wasn't a usual week, and I wasn't in the mood for polite scheduling. It was one of those bone-dry autumn afternoons, the kind where the light makes everything look prettier than it is, as if the world's trying to trick you into forgiving things. Dad was in the garage, messing with the snowblower even though we were at least a month away from real snow, and Mom was on the back porch, trimming dead leaves off the potted basil she never actually cooks with. I didn't go in with a plan. That's probably what made the whole thing feel like a car crash in slow motion. I just walked into the garage, leaned against the workbench like I had every right to stand there, and said, "So, when were you going to tell me you gave Emily the money?" He looked up like I'd just asked him if he knew the square root of an insult. His hands didn't stop moving, though he kept fiddling with the engine, which I guess was easier than looking me in the eye. "We didn't think it was something that needed discussing," he said after a beat, like the thing wasn't $100,000 and a full-blown shift in how I saw everything. "She's settled down. She's starting a family. That's different." "She settled down?" I repeated, and I could feel the sarcasm twist into something sour in my throat. "And I'm what? A drifter with a laptop. You're still figuring things out, Mike." "That's not a judgment. That's just where you're at." His tone was calm, almost patronizing, like he was explaining the weather to a confused child. I felt my chest tighten, not with anger exactly, but with that exhausted, slow-burning rage that builds when people pretend they're not screwing you while they're actively screwing you. I didn't even know how to answer that at first. I just stood there, thinking about how many years I've spent swallowing things like that sentence whole. Still figuring things out. What the hell does that even mean? Because I don't have a wife? Because I rent instead of own? Because I don't slap a family photo on my Christmas cards? I finally said, I paid her tuition once. You remember that? He blinked, still avoiding my face. She needed help back then. Right, I said. And I had it, so I gave it. No conditions. No comparisons. But when I needed help, when I was sleeping on a couch after Liz left, when I was getting calls from the bank about medical debt from Mom's treatment you said insurance would cover, no one asked if I was okay. Dad put down the wrench, finally looking at me now, his face unreadable in that way only men who've spent 50 years not crying know how to do. "It's not that we didn't want to help," he said. "It's that we thought you were okay. You always figured it out." That sentence. That same goddamn sentence again. Like being competent meant I deserved less. Have you ever been the one your family leaned on until it came time to give something back? Tell me in the comments if this sounds familiar. Because being the strong one doesn't come with a trophy. It comes with silence. It comes with being invisible when it matters most. Later, when I talked to Mom, her response wasn't much better, but it was softer, more laced with guilt than denial. She kept saying things like, "We didn't want to make you feel worse, and you were going through so much at the time." She meant the divorce. She meant the job changes. She meant all the things I fought through with duct tape and caffeine and never once asked them for help with. "You were so proud, Mike," she said, setting down her teacup like she was in a Hallmark movie instead of a reckoning. "We didn't want to insult you." I laughed. Out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was too sad not to. "You thought helping me would be an insult, but helping her was love. Do you hear how that sounds?" She didn't answer. She just looked at me with that wounded expression parents use when you finally say something they can't fix with a casserole. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was never just the money. It was that they'd made a decision about who needed support and who didn't, and they'd made that call without ever asking me, without trusting me to tell them what I needed. They looked at me and assumed I'd be fine. They looked at her and assumed she'd fall apart. And maybe they were both wrong. I left without finishing my coffee. I didn't slam the door or make a scene, because scenes don't do anything in families like mine. They just give people an excuse to call you dramatic. On the way home, I stopped at a diner and ordered pancakes I didn't want, just so I could sit at the counter and think. I thought about what it meant to be overlooked, not because you're nothing, but because you're competent. Because you never gave them a reason to worry, they just stopped looking. And that's when I decided to prove a point. Not with words. Not with another emotional autopsy of our family dysfunction. With paper. Something official. Something undeniable. I was going to get approved for a mortgage. I was going to buy a house. Not because I needed one right now, and not because I wanted to play catch-up with my sister's fairy tale, but because I needed them to see, in black and white, what they refused to see in me all these years. I was going to send them the letter. One line. That's all. Figured it out. It wasn't a mansion, not even close, but that didn't matter, not to me. It was small, older than I'd hoped, and about 10 miles farther from the city than I liked, but for the first time in a long damn time, I had a key to something that was mine, and only mine. The real estate agent called it cozy and full of character, which is what people say when they're trying to sell you charm instead of square footage. But when I walked into that place and saw the chip tile in the entryway and the faint smell of dust and possibility, I saw something else. I saw a door that no one could tell me to leave through. I saw a life I didn't have to beg for. Getting that mortgage pre-approval took more paperwork than adopting a child in some countries, and I jumped through hoops like a damn circus animal to get it all done. Credit reports, pay stubs, tax returns going back longer than I even remembered filing. It was humbling in that way that reminds you just how many times you failed and how many pieces you had to put yourself back together from. But in the end, there it was, in bold at the top of the email, approved. I stared at the screen for a long time before doing anything. Just sitting there in my shitty apartment, the heat too loud, the neighbor's dog barking like it was owed an apology, and my laptop humming like it knew this moment was heavier than it looked. I took a screenshot. Saved it. Then I opened a new email draft and attached the letter. No subject line. Just one sentence typed into the body of the message, center-aligned like it was standing tall. Figured it out. I didn't add anything else. No, hi mom, no, just wanted to share, none of that soft padding we use to keep things from cutting too deep. Just that. Figured it out. I hit send without giving myself another second to overthink it, because I knew if I hesitated, I'd delete the whole thing and go back to being quiet about it, back to being the son who smiles and shrugs and lets things slide. Then I closed the laptop, poured myself a drink, and waited for the silence to start. Because silence was all I got. No reply. No, we're proud of you. No congrats, son. Not even a thumbs up emoji for mom, which she uses for everything, even when someone dies. Just a void, like the email had been sent into a vacuum that didn't give a shit about effort or pride or finally standing on your own 2 feet. I went to bed with a pit in my stomach, and I told myself it didn't matter. That this was about me, not them. That I didn't need their validation. That it was better this way. But I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling again, just like I had the night Emily spilled the truth over brunch and changed something inside me that hadn't been touched in years. And then the next morning, my phone rang. It was Emily. I almost didn't pick up. But I did. She was crying before I even said hello. Full-on crying, the kind that steals your breath and scrambles your words. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or anger or confusion, but it came through the speaker like a tidal wave and knocked me right on my ass. "Mike, why would you do that?" she asked, her voice cracking like an old hinge. "Why would you send that to them?" I took a breath, slow and measured, and said, "Because I had to. Because they needed to see it." She went quiet for a second, then said something I wasn't ready for. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know it came from your college fund." My blood ran cold. "What?" I said, because even though I heard her, I needed to hear it again. "I didn't know," she repeated, slower this time, like each word hurt to say. "They never told me. I thought it was just savings they had set aside. I didn't know they drained your fund to help me buy the house." I couldn't even speak. My jaw clenched so tight it felt like my teeth were going to crack. I felt something in my stomach drop, like the floor had vanished. "They told me you never finished college because you changed majors too many times," she said, still crying. "They said you didn't need the money, that you gave up." I sat down hard on the edge of my bed because the weight of it all finally got too heavy to hold standing up. "I didn't give up," I said. "I left school because Mom got sick and you were still in undergrad. Someone had to help. Dad was working 60 hours a week, and you were one panic attack away from dropping out. So I stayed home. I worked. I made sure the lights stayed on." Emily went quiet again, but I could hear her breathing, could hear the way it caught in her throat like she wanted to say something and couldn't find the words. "I thought I was the one who was always overlooked," she said finally, softly. "Turns out I was just the one who never saw the full picture." There was no satisfaction in hearing that. No vindication. Just more grief. More history that had been rewritten in whispers behind closed doors. And I realized in that moment that the worst part of family betrayal isn't the moment it happens. It's the years you spend thinking it was your fault. Thinking you misunderstood. That you just weren't enough. "I'm sorry," she said, and I believed her. I really did. But sorry doesn't fix history. It doesn't return stolen futures or reframe old decisions. It just sits there, awkward and useless, like an umbrella after the storm's already ruined everything. "I don't want the money," she added. "I didn't want any of it to be like this." And, for the first time, I understood something I hadn't before. None of us were okay. Not really. Not me. Not Emily. And sure as hell not our parents. But now I had a house. Now I had a key. And no one gave it to me, I earned it. Dragged it into existence with bleeding hands and sleepless nights. And now they knew it too. The invitation came in a group text from Mom, polite as ever and worded like we were all just normal people who hadn't gutted each other emotionally over the past few weeks. She wanted us over for dinner, nothing fancy, just a family meal, she wrote, like those two words still meant something that could patch a hole as wide as the one we were sitting in. I knew what it was, though. A ceasefire dinner. The kind where you put on clean clothes and pretend like everyone didn't just find out something soul-crushing. The kind where wine is poured too early and too often, and you chew through awkward silences like they're overcooked chicken. I almost didn't go, but I did. And maybe that was my mistake. Or maybe it was the last thing I owed to whatever was left of the idea of family. Emily was already there when I arrived, sitting at the table with that stiff, exhausted look that only comes after you've cried yourself empty. Her makeup was good, but not good enough to hide the redness in her eyes. Mom was fluttering between the kitchen and the dining room, all hospitality and avoidance, like maybe if she could keep the bread warm and the wine glasses full, we wouldn't notice the rot under the floorboards. Dad sat in his usual chair at the head of the table, staring into his drink like it might have answers he hadn't found in any of us. Dinner started with forced smiles and questions about work that no one really wanted the answers to. Emily asked about my new place. I told her it was fine. She asked if I'd painted yet. I said I didn't have time. We both knew that wasn't true, but lies were easier than honesty when the truth had already drawn so much blood. Mom served chicken dry, bland, overcooked like always, and poured herself a second glass of wine before anyone was halfway through their first. I watched the way her hand trembled just slightly when she reached for the butter dish, like she was holding something in. Or maybe everything. It was about halfway through the meal when the clinking of silverware was the only sound in the room that Emily finally broke. Her voice came out sharp, but shaky, like she'd rehearsed it and still wasn't ready. "You didn't have to humiliate them," she said, eyes fixed on me like I was a stranger who'd walked in off the street and pissed on the carpet. I blinked, genuinely thrown by how backwards the accusation felt. Humiliate them? She dropped her fork. It clanged against the plate like a gunshot. That email. You could have just told them. You didn't have to make it some kind of statement. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was either that or lose my shit completely. Emily, it was one line. One goddamn line. I didn't write a manifesto. I didn't send a bomb. I told them I figured it out, because apparently that's what they were waiting on before they thought I was worth helping. You made it sound like they failed you, she snapped. Maybe they did, I said, my voice louder than I meant, sharp enough to make Mom flinch. That's when she jumped in, trying to play referee with her soft, sad tone and her too sweet expressions that always made my skin crawl when things got real. We didn't want you to feel like a failure compared to her, Mom said, as if that was some kind of loving gesture. As if excluding me from the one thing that could have changed everything was actually a mercy. I turned to her, slowly, and let the silence build until she was squirming in her seat. You didn't help me because you thought I wouldn't make it, I said, every word deliberate and cutting because they needed to be. You wrote me off before I even had a chance. Mom's lips parted like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to tell me it wasn't true, but she didn't. Because she couldn't. Because deep down, she knew. I dropped out of college to help this family, I continued, the edge in my voice rising like a tide. I gave up years for you. I paid Emily's loans. I sat in that hospital with you, Mom. I cleaned up Dad when he passed out in the garage. I've been figuring it out because I didn't have a safety net. Because you pulled it out from under me and handed it to her. The table was silent, except for the sound of Dad's breathing, slow and heavy like a man who's just now realizing the fire he thought he contained has already burned through the walls. I didn't ask for a handout, I said, softer now, because the shouting was done. I asked for a chance. You didn't give it to me because you assumed I didn't need it, but you never asked. You just decided. That's when Dad finally moved. He didn't say a word. He didn't yell or argue or explain. He just slammed his glass down so hard it cracked at the base, the sound echoing through the dining room like a thunderclap, and then he stood up and walked out. No jacket. No shoes. Just walked out the front door into the night like something in him had snapped, or maybe like he needed to be somewhere else before he said something he couldn't take back. The door didn't slam. It just clicked shut behind him, quiet and final, and in the silence that followed, none of us knew what to say. We just sat there, three people pretending to be a family, chewing through the wreckage of things we never said until it was too damn late. It wasn't planned, the way most heavy things aren't. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the dinner, the kind of silence that sits thick in your throat, where you don't check your phone because you already know no one's reaching out. Emily texted once, just a photo of her kid in a Halloween costume, probably trying to build a bridge with something innocent and non-threatening, but I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to pretend things hadn't snapped, that the foundation hadn't already shifted beyond what could be patched with polite words and holiday cards. But that Saturday, I found myself driving the old road to the house I grew up in, like my body had decided it needed to go before my brain had signed off. The trees were bare now, all bones and brittle edges, and the neighborhood looked exactly the same in that weird way where nothing's actually unchanged. It's just been slowly decaying at a pace you don't notice until you come back after too long. The driveway still had the hairline crack down the middle that Dad always swore he'd fix one of these days, and the front steps still leaned slightly to the left like the whole house was sighing under the weight of its own memories. No one was home, which honestly felt like a gift. I let myself in with the spare key. They still hadn't moved from under the fake rock next to the flower bed. Some things stay the same because they're too tired to change, and walked through the living room like I was trespassing. The couch was new, or at least new to them, but everything else looked familiar enough to make my chest ache. The same yellowing family photos in plastic frames, the same dusty bookshelf with Reader's Digest collections nobody had opened in 20 years. The faint smell of something floral and old, like time had been boxed up in there with the windows closed. I didn't stop. I went straight to the garage. It had always been Dad's place, full of tools he never labeled and projects he never finished, smelling of motor oil, sawdust, and that particular kind of masculinity born from fixing things you didn't break. As a kid, I'd watched him in there for hours, learning more from his silences than his instructions. That space felt holy then, like a shrine to a man who knew how the world worked. Now it just felt like a museum of deferred intentions. I started digging, not sure what I was even looking for. Maybe proof, maybe answers, maybe just something to hold in my hands that made me feel less forgotten. That's when I found it, an old cardboard box tucked behind the lawn chairs and half-deflated basketballs, the tape brittle and peeling. It was labeled with my name in thick black marker, the letters slanted like Mom's handwriting used to be before arthritis took its toll. Inside, there were pieces of me I hadn't seen in decades. My high school graduation tassel, bent and frayed. A medal from a math competition I didn't even remember winning. A stack of college acceptance letters, UC Santa Cruz, Arizona State, some tiny liberal arts college in Vermont I'd applied to on a whim. All the dreams I had before life pulled the rug out from under me and handed me bills instead of degrees. Tucked inside one of the envelopes was a folded piece of notepaper, pale blue and lined, the kind Mom used to keep near the kitchen phone. I unfolded it carefully, my hands suddenly unsteady, and read the words written in familiar looping script. "He'll land on his feet. He always does." That one line felt like a brick to the chest. I had to sit down right there on the cold garage floor, my knees suddenly useless, like those words had knocked something loose inside me I'd been holding together with spite and sarcasm. They hadn't helped me because they believed in me. That's what they would say if I asked. That's what that note was supposed to mean. But what it actually meant was worse. They hadn't helped me because they thought I didn't need it, because I'd always figured it out. Because I hadn't collapsed under pressure, hadn't cried for help in the loudest voice, hadn't failed publicly enough to make them think I was in danger of not making it. I'd struggled quietly, invisibly, and they mistook silence for strength. Or worse, they mistook resilience for comfort. And they gave the safety net to the one who looked more fragile, more worthy of being caught. I wanted to scream. Or maybe cry. Or maybe just set the whole box on fire in the driveway like some kind of twisted exorcism. But I didn't do any of that. I just sat there, holding that note, feeling the bitterness bloom in my gut like something poisonous and permanent. That kind of thing doesn't go away. It changes you. It alters the way you see love, makes it feel transactional, conditional, measured in performances and perceptions rather than truth. Makes you question every "I'm proud of you," every pat on the back, every goddamn Christmas gift wrapped in the illusion of equality. I stayed there for a while, just breathing in the stale air of old wood and rust, letting the past crawl all over me like a second skin. When I finally stood up, legs stiff and soul heavier than before, I didn't take the box. I left it there. Let it rot with the rest of the things they couldn't bring themselves to say out loud. Driving home, my phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A voicemail. I didn't recognize the number at first, but I played it anyway. It was Dad. His voice was lower than usual, quieter, like he didn't want to be overheard even though it was a recording. "You think you're the only one who got left behind?" Click. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just that one haunting question dropped into my lap like a lit match. And suddenly, I didn't know what the hell to feel anymore. The text came late on a Tuesday night, that strange, quiet hour where most of the world is asleep and the only people awake are those who can't outrun whatever's gnawing at them from the inside. Emily's message was simple, almost neutral in tone, like she was trying not to show her hand too much. Can we talk? Just you and me. I stared at the screen for a full minute, torn between deleting the message and throwing my phone across the room, or doing the thing I've always done. Say yes, show up, be the bigger brother who's always got room to bleed, just a little more for the family. We met at the park near her neighborhood, the one with the duck pond and the rusting swing set we used to play on as kids. She was already sitting on a bench when I arrived, wearing a hoodie that looked like it belonged to someone else and holding a cup of coffee with both hands like she needed the warmth more than the caffeine. She looked tired, not just in the physical sense, but in that deeper, hollowed-out way that happens when the mask has been on too long and the skin underneath starts to forget what peace feels like. She didn't say anything at first, just nodded at me and gestured to the seat beside her. I sat, letting the cold bite at my fingers, and waited. I figured if she'd found the courage to text me, she'd eventually find the words, too. And after a long, shaky breath, she finally did. I didn't ask for the money, she said, her voice small but clear, like it had been locked in her throat for weeks. They offered it. Just said they wanted to help, said it was time I had something of my own. I thought it was a gift, but it wasn't. It was a contract. It came with strings I didn't see until they were already wrapped around my neck. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I hadn't done that in a long time. Emily had always been the shiny one, the one who made life look like it came with a script and perfect lighting. But right then, she looked like someone who'd been playing a part for so long she'd forgotten how to be real. My marriage is falling apart, she said, not dramatically, not with tears, just like she was finally surrendering to something that had already collapsed behind her. We're in therapy. Well, I'm in therapy. He thinks I'm just being dramatic. Says I'm trying to find problems where there aren't any. She laughed then, but it was the kind that sounds more like a sob in disguise. I used to think I was the lucky one, she went on, her eyes never leaving the horizon. The one who had it together, who did it all right. But that house? That life? It's not mine. It's theirs. It's what they built for me. Every decision I made was about pleasing them. What school, what major, what kind of man I married. I don't even know who I am outside of all that. I just followed the script. And then she told me something I didn't see coming. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about her life. I cried on my wedding night, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not because I was happy. Not even because I was nervous. I cried because I felt like I was walking into a prison. I told Mom, right there in the dressing room. I told her I didn't think I could do it. You know what she said? I shook my head, my stomach already sinking. She said, "You'll learn to love him. You've already come this far and everyone's watching." There was silence between us after that, the kind that feels like a blanket thrown over a fire, suffocating, but necessary. I didn't have a choice, she said. Not really. Everything they gave me came with a price. They bought my independence and disguised it as support. I leaned back on the bench, staring up at the night sky that looked just like it did when we were kids, endless and impossible and full of questions no one ever answered. And I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness, not exactly, but maybe understanding. Maybe something like shared pain. You were always the one they cheered for, I said, not bitter anymore, just stating a fact. And I was the one they expected to carry the weight quietly. Different roles. Same cage. She looked at me then, eyes glassy but firm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the sister I used to build forts with in the living room, the one who'd cry when our goldfish died and hide under the blanket with me during thunderstorms. I don't want their help anymore, she said. I don't want their expectations. I just want to figure out who I am when no one's watching. I nodded because there was nothing else to do. Because maybe we were both just broken in different directions by the same damn hammer. As we stood up to leave, her hand brushed mine. Not a hug. Not a reconciliation. Just a human touch between two people who realized they weren't enemies, just victims of the same flawed design. And then she asked me, her voice almost too soft to hear, but the words landing like a gut punch I didn't see coming. Would you ever trade places with me? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know. It took me 3 days to call him back, and even then, the only reason I did it was because his voicemail wouldn't stop echoing in my head like some old, unfinished song that always comes back at the worst time. You think you're the only one who got left behind? That question haunted me, not because it felt wrong, but because some part of me knew it wasn't. That voicemail didn't sound angry. It didn't sound defensive. It sounded tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from one fight, but from years of holding on to something you never quite knew how to let go of. When I finally showed up at the house, he didn't say much. Just gave me that nod men like him give when emotions are too damn complicated to speak out loud. We sat on the back porch, where the wind carried the dry smell of leaves and the faint sound of someone mowing their lawn a few houses down. He had a beer in his hand, already halfway done, and I cracked one open without asking. There was no, "Have you been?" No, "Glad you're here." We just sat in that stiff, quiet air, two grown men who didn't know how to stitch together what had come undone. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said after a long while, his voice low and rough, like gravel under tires. None of this, none of what happened, was meant to come out the way it did. I didn't reply, just stared out at the lawn, the one he'd always kept perfectly edged and mowed with military precision. It looked the same as it always had, and for some reason, that made me angry. "I grew up with nothing," he continued, and something about the way he said it told me he'd never said it out loud before. Not like this. Dirt floor nothing. Clothes that didn't fit. Parents who worked themselves to the bone and still couldn't afford Christmas presents or decent shoes. And I swore to myself back then that if I ever had a family, I'd make sure they didn't go without. That they'd never feel that kind of hunger, that kind of instability. He paused to take a drink, like he needed the bitterness of the beer to wash down the memory. Stability, he said. That became the only thing I trusted. Not talent. Not love. Not potential. Just stability. If something looked steady, dependable, I latched onto it. I nodded slowly, starting to see the outline of the man I'd grown up with in a different kind of light. Still flawed. Still human. But maybe not the villain I'd painted in my head these past few months. "So you saw Emily," I said, "with her degree and her teaching job and her husband, and she looked stable." He looked at me, the corners of his mouth twitching, not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. "Yeah, she did. And you always had fire, Mike. You were smart, sure, but you were all over the place. You wanted to write, then code, then fix motorcycles. You'd fall hard for things and just as hard out of them. I never knew where you were going, only that you'd go somewhere." "And that scared you?" I asked. "It didn't scare me," he said. "It made me think you'd be fine without us. That you'd figure it out." I leaned back in the chair, let that land for a minute, heavy as it was. It wasn't hate. It wasn't rejection. It was something colder, indifference born from misguided belief. "And what if I didn't?" I asked. "What if I'd fallen and stayed down? What if I hadn't figured it out?" He stared at his hands like he didn't recognize them. "Then I'd have failed you," he said, and that was the first honest thing I think I'd ever heard come out of his mouth in years. We didn't talk for a while after that. Just let the breeze speak for us, let the silence carry the weight of things we should have said 20 years ago but didn't because men like us were raised to keep pain tucked behind gritted teeth. "You know," I said eventually, "it wasn't just about the money. It was about feeling like I never mattered as much. Like you believed in her more than you did in me." He didn't deny it. He didn't argue. He just sat there, and in that stillness was an admission bigger than anything words could have carried. "I didn't know how to love you without fixing you," he said, and those words hit harder than any insult ever could. "And you never looked like you needed fixing." I closed my eyes for a second, swallowed the lump in my throat that had been building since I stepped onto that porch. "She got money. I got silence." "That's how it felt," I said. "And I thought silence meant trust," he replied, shaking his head like he finally saw the flaw in his logic. It wasn't closure. Not even close. But it was something. A crack in the wall that let in just enough light to remind me there was still a man behind it, still trying to make sense of his own ghosts while I fought mine. As I stood to leave, the beer warm in my hand and my head full of more questions than answers, I turned to him and asked what had been eating at me since this whole damn thing started. Was it love? I said, looking him dead in the eye, or was it investment? He didn't answer. Just looked at me like he didn't know either. And that silence, that heavy, wordless pause between father and son, said more than any hug, any apology, any grand gesture ever could. The day I closed on the house, it rained like the sky had been holding something in too long and finally let go all at once. Not a soft drizzle or some romantic fall mist, but a full-blown, cold, shoulder-soaking downpour that made everything feel heavier than it already did. My jacket was soaked by the time I reached the porch with the keys jangling in my hand, and as I unlocked the door, I couldn't help but laugh. Of course the weather would pull something like this, because nothing about this journey had ever been neat or symbolic or perfectly timed. The house was small, a two-bedroom fixer-upper with warped floors, outdated cabinets, and a furnace that groaned like a dying animal. But it was mine. Every creaky step and peeling baseboard and water-stained ceiling tile, it all belonged to me. No landlord to answer to. No one to tell me when to fix something or how to decorate or when to leave. I stood in the empty living room for a long time that afternoon, just listening to the rain slam against the windows, letting the quiet settle around me like a blanket I didn't know I needed. I sent out one invitation for a housewarming, nothing formal or fancy, just a group text that said, "If you want to see the place, I'll have some beers on the porch Saturday afternoon." No pressure. No pressure. That was me trying to pretend it didn't matter who showed up. That it wouldn't sting if they didn't. That I wasn't still, even now, reaching out from somewhere deep and quiet, hoping to be seen. Saturday came with blue skies and cool wind, the kind of weather that makes you think maybe the world isn't trying to punish you all the time. I set up 2 lawn chairs on the front porch, a plastic cooler filled with cheap beer between them. I didn't put out more chairs. I didn't expect anyone but maybe Emily, and even that felt like a coin toss. She arrived an hour late, no explanation, just a small wave from the curb like we hadn't gone through hell and back together over the past few months. She sat down next to me without a word, popped open a can of beer, and stared out at the street like she'd lived on that block her whole life. We didn't talk for a while, and honestly, we didn't have to. Some silences aren't uncomfortable, they're just space, finally free of the tension that's lived in your chest for too long. "This place has good bones," she said finally, her voice soft but certain, the kind of thing people say when they don't know what else to compliment. I just nodded because yeah, it did. It had bones. And it was standing. That was enough. She took a sip of beer, squinting at the sun. "You know," she said after a moment, "I think we were both screwed in different ways." I looked over at her, and she was already watching me, eyes tired but clear. "I was smothered with help I didn't ask for," she continued. "And you were left alone when you probably needed someone the most. They didn't get either of us right." I didn't say anything at first. Just let her words settle between us like dust finally deciding where to land. And I realized she was right. We weren't enemies in this. We were just collateral damage from 2 parents doing the best they could with the tools they had, and those tools, unfortunately, were blunt and rusty as hell. We finished a couple beers in mostly silence, watching the neighborhood kids ride bikes in uneven circles, and an old man walk his beagle like he'd been doing it at the same hour for 40 years. It felt like nothing and everything all at once. Like peace wrapped in the plastic of cheap domestic lager and long overdue honesty. She left with a quick hug and a promise to come by again soon, though I wasn't holding her to it. People say that sort of thing, not out of obligation, but because it's what you say when you want the door to stay open, even just a crack. A week later, I came home from work to find a small brown package sitting on the porch. No note, no return address, just my name in that familiar cursive that had filled birthday cards and sticky notes on the fridge my whole life. I brought it inside, sat down at the kitchen counter that still needed repainting, and opened it carefully, like it might break if I breathed too hard. Inside was my old baseball glove, worn soft with age, the leather faded and cracked in places, but still solid. I hadn't seen it in over 20 years. Tucked inside the palm was a folded piece of paper, yellowed just slightly at the edges. "We thought you didn't need us." We were wrong. No signature. No apology. Just that. I held that glove for a long time, longer than I care to admit, and stared at that note like it was some kind of puzzle I'd spent my whole life trying to solve. And maybe it was. Maybe that was the point. Maybe they didn't know how to say the things we needed to hear when we needed to hear them, but they were trying now in their own clumsy way. I walked out to the porch, sat down in one of the chairs, and looked at my house, my home. Still a work in progress. Still chipped and cracked and unfinished in more places than not. But it stood. It was mine. And no one could take that from me now. Maybe I did need them. Maybe I just needed them to see me. Was I too proud? Were they too blind? I don't know. But sometimes a house isn't just walls and a roof. It's all the shit we never said, finally standing still. You tell me, was I right to send that email?